The latest RotoWire Roundtable Baseball rankings are up on the site right now. Here to help me discuss those is Erik Halterman, RotoWire's baseball editor, coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Erik Halterman. We are brought to you by the good folks at Fantrax all draft season. If you've got a Dynasty League, Fantrax is great. They've got every single player in their database you could possibly imagine. It's a great site. Tout Wars online drafts also run on Fantrax. We heartily endorse them, and we thank them for their sponsorship. I'm Jeff Erickson here with Erik Halterman. Erik, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Nice to get the chance to talk to you again. We been over some of our rankings just before we came out with the latest update on the radio. So good to touch base after it's all done over here.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot going on. We are a week away from pitchers and catchers reporting. We have a bunch of free agents still out there. I think I thought that, usually we'd be back to a normal like spring training cycle, no lockout, anything like this. I find it to be an unusual number of free agents out there, given the labor piece, given that there's no other extraneous circumstances to keep players from signing.
Yeah, I think that's true. And how much do you think that has to do with the fact that two of the top free agents on this year's market, two of the top guys who are still out there as well, are just weird, right? Blake Snell and Cody Bellinger, both of them coming off of very good, but good in a weird way type seasons. I think if Blake Snell was a normal defending Cy Young, he would be signed by now on huge money, right? Normally, if you hit free agency at the perfect time and you had a dominant season, and it's a dominant season of the type that people understand and of the type that people have seen before, we know what happens. You get paid a ton, and Snell may still get paid a ton, but I don't think it surprises me that it's taken teams another month to convince themselves that, you know what, even though he did walk all those guys last year, and even though he isn't a Cy Young candidate every year, we still really want Blake Snell. I think he's harder to talk yourself into than the equivalently projected pitchers in previous off seasons. Same
especially
thing,
for the years.
Too.
Yeah, especially, I could see like a high average annual value. It's the years that I think would be a sticking point. And I actually think there's probably some teams also that are just like, no, we're out on him. So he probably has a smaller pool to draw from in the first place too.
Yeah, right. And with the years, you're more comfortable giving a longer deal again to a guy you understand, right? I think that it just doubles down on the same problem. I'm pretty sure that Blake Snell is going to be good next year. I've ranked him high enough that I think he's going to be good. I don't know exactly how well he's going to be able to repeat those dominant numbers with such a weird outlier walk rate. But man, that starts to become more and more of a problem as he ages, as his velocity dips. If that strikeout rate comes down into the high 20s and he still has these high walk rates, suddenly we're not talking about a guy who's dripped from an ace to a number two. We're talking about a guy who's pretty shaky, and I'm not very confident running him out there, right? So I think he's exactly the type of guy who exactly this sort of thing was going to happen to.
We are all over the map on Blake Snell, too, in the latest roundtable rankings. You have him at 54. Clay Link's got him at 47. I'm at 86. Todd Zola's at 128. So, that's a pretty wide range variance there. And he's a variant pitcher, so it makes sense. I understand completely. But nonetheless, I think it's still noteworthy there that we're kind of looking at that. If you look at like the last months of ADP on the NFBC, which I just love that you can search under like any date, any type of draft. It's such a great search tool in addition to just being a reliable set of rankings. He's 66 in the NFBC in the last month, but a range of 39 to 91. So Todd Zola's never getting him. I'm most likely not getting him. And I'll admit, I recently moved him down some too.
Yeah, I did the same. I think I was more high on him. I think I was in the 40s, and I didn't really want to be, right? Sometimes that happens when you make, especially this year, because we started our roundtable earlier, right? We brought them out in November rather than, say, around this time. It meant there's just more time to see how the rest of the market develops on a player. And I think when I set down my initial rankings, this is where it felt like a defending Cy Young that strikes out, over 30% of batters every single year should go, even with those control questions. Then it turns out well, looks like everybody else is about 20 picks behind. And if you didn't intend to be high on a player, I think you got to move him from where he initially fell on your rankings. I think the rest of the world is telling you, hey, probably take a deeper dive. You're off by something here.
Yeah. The funny thing is with Snell and with Bellinger, I haven't even heard any buzz. Like I haven't heard like, oh, he's this close to signing, or he was going to, he was close here and then was going to. I haven't heard anything about that there. There's teams where there's an obvious place where he could sign, but we haven't even heard that buzz. Like the Giants, he could go to the Giants, and it would be an immediate improvement. The Mets could use him, although the Mets, I don't know what the Mets are trying to do this year, so that's one of those other things there. He was trending a little bit the other day because Trevor Bauer is trending, and Trevor Bauer tweeted about how Blake Snell's going to get it, but I'll take the league minimum and all that. There was never any like, okay, they're close to signing him.
Right. Yeah, there's some rumors that I was seeing, and the Cubs fans seem to be worried that Bellinger was getting offers from the Phillies. I wasn't really seeing that as something that was very likely to happen. I think most of the Cubs fans are seeing every possibility that he might go somewhere else as, man, come on, are we really going to lose another? The Cubs really want to take that step forward. I mean, you saw the PECOTA standings came out the other day, and the entire NL Central feels like they're projected for just about 80 wins. So the Cubs bringing Bellinger back, that would be huge with how tight that division is. And I think he is another one where the contract he signs is going to be something of a signal for how we should feel about him. And specifically, I think if the Cubs show the world that they're confident giving Cody Bellinger a big long-term contract, then I'm going to feel just a little bit better about him. Maybe that's dumb, but I think that, again, he's coming off just such a strange, not just one season, but one of the weirdest career arcs that I can remember in my time following baseball, given how good he was to how bad he was, and then how long it took him to get good again, and then the shape of what he looks like now that he's good again. He had plenty of homers, but didn't actually hit the ball that hard. Suddenly he's a contact hitter, except with some homers, but we don't think those are necessarily going to stick around. If the Cubs show us, hey, we buy into Cody Bellinger, we've seen him the last year, we think that what he's doing works and will continue to work, I'll have a little bit more faith. But the longer he stays out there, the more I have to assume that every other team is not really convinced that Cody Bellinger's the guy either.
Yeah, I'm actually high man on Belly. I didn't expect to be or want to be. It's not like I'm like planting my Bellinger flag and saying, yes, got to go get him. I'm kind of around ADP is the way I'm looking at it there, but I don't know. It's weird. High BABIP, career high BABIP, career worst in barrel rate, but such better K numbers that he's a confounding picture. And we talked about him at First Pitch Arizona, and I didn't know what quite to make out of him there. 82.6% contact rate. He's never come, in 2019, 2020, the Dodgers, he came close to that, but the two previous years, he was down at 70%. To 2021, it was like one of the all-time unlucky seasons. He had a 196 BABIP that year, which is just insane. I really don't know what to make out of him. And granted, he was coming off the shoulder injury, and I think that's probably a good thing. He only played 95 games that year, so that's probably speaks to that. I should probably just even write off 2021 entirely.
Yeah, but then the fact they didn't come all the way back in 2022 is what made it harder to do, right? If he was so down in 2021 and then was maybe a 110 WRC plus in 2022, we say, all right, he came most of the way back. But no, he was at an 83 in 2022. So if that was still lingering shoulder, I guess, I mean, maybe his injury was of such a type that he was able to play, but he just wasn't himself for so long. But judging by how hard he's hitting the ball now, it was his career worst hard hit rate by quite a bit last year, by 3 percentage points over that 2021 season and by about 7 over every other year. So is he even all the way back in that shoulder? I just don't know. That said, he's probably going to steal 15 to 20 bases. So how good does the bat need to be to justify a pretty high pick, given that there's the upside that maybe he is just fine? So I get why people are still in on him. If he didn't get the speed back last year, it'd be really hard to draft him where he's going. But man, I don't know. I think let's see that contract. And if it's big, I think I'm probably moving him up 5 to 10 spots. And if it's one of those, hey, 3-year deal with opt-outs after the first and second, then I think that'll be telling us something.
Yeah, I almost want him to sign that though if I have him.
Yeah,
I want him to have to prove himself again. I think he's a prime candidate for Rick Wolf and Glenn Colton, and never signing a guy off of his career if he gets paid. He
true.
strikes me as that guy. The funny thing is his fly ball percentage was down last year. Bellinger's was, and but it was still 43.4%. It's still very high fly ball
Right.
percentage, even with it being down, which is kind of interesting. I want him to sign in Chicago.
Yeah.
If I have him in a dynasty or keeper league, that's where I want him to land, is stay home, be comfortable.
Yeah, and if he's a guy who needs an environment that's like well conducive for him to perform well, for him to hit the way he wants to, I could see that being the case. And seems like, judging by his numbers last year, he was happy in Chicago. So I think that would make sense. If you've drafted him already, that's what I'd be rooting for too.
Yeah. Switching up the order of our outline a little bit, we just kind of went down the path of free agents here. There's others too. I mean, there are at least like 7 or 8 guys I think are viable. Snell, Bellinger, Jordan Montgomery, Matt Chapman, JD Martinez, Jorge Soler. There's 2 shortstops, Ahmed Rosario and Tim Anderson. So that's 8 right there. You can argue unviable on a couple of these cases here, but Jordan Montgomery, really, you would think he improved his status, his stock with his run with the Rangers. Maybe he's overplaying his hand. What's your take on Jordan Montgomery?
Yeah, it's possible that the fact that he's still out there is because there's disagreement as to just how far he's improved his status, I suppose. I mean, he's had ERAs under 350 the last 2 years, but his expected ERA both those years was right at 4. So I could see teams and his agent differing on exactly how good he is. He is someone for whom it's going to matter where he lands, I think, because he just doesn't get that many strikeouts. 21 point something percent each of the last 2 years isn't bad. He's not going to be a zero there, but compared to other pitchers who are about as good as he is, he allows more contact. So if he lands in a larger park, I think that should move him up a few spots. If he lands in a small park, I think that's going to move him down. I think that's in contrast to somebody like a Blake Snell, given that Blake Snell's game is so strikeout based. So you're going to get strikeouts wherever you are. I know that Todd Zola will chime in and say that there are strikeout park factors. Those are true. But
True.
generally speaking, if you're never letting a guy put the ball in play, it doesn't matter nearly as much where you're playing. So something to keep an eye on with Montgomery for sure.
Yeah, with Texas, 279, 109. That really worked out pretty well. With St. Louis is 342, 125. But the year before, after the trade to St. Louis, he was pretty damn good. So, it's one of those where I don't think St. Louis was necessarily holding him back. I do like that he now seems to be quasi safe. He seems like a guy that we can get 180 innings out of. And that's something I like.
Yeah, I mean, just goes to show what is durability with pitchers. What do we know there? He had the Tommy John, so for a few years, I guess he's an injury risk, but 2021, 30 starts, 2022, 32 starts, 2023, 32 starts. So just because you've been injured before doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be injured again. Of course, for all we know, he could get hurt in April and go down for the entire year. So maybe that's past surgery is affecting his potential contract, given that he's, heading into his age 31 season. Do you want to give 6, 7, 8 years to a guy who's had the surgery, but are you going to find a pitcher who hasn't at this point? So I think at this year, I think by now is enough years removed that he counts as durable as you're going to hope for.
Yeah, agreed. You and I are on the low end on Jordan Montgomery. You've got him, I think, at 182.
Yeah.
I've got him at 153. Todd Zola's got him at 95. So again, good amount of variance there. I think it goes back to strikeouts. If I'm going to be, I don't want to spend a top 100 pick on a pitcher that's not getting me above average strikeouts. So, but then again, maybe you get there on volume. Maybe he goes deeper in the game, so he comes a little closer to that. I don't know. It's an interesting debate. Next guy on our list, Matt Chapman. Matt Chapman, he of the hard hit rate early and the massive slump late. I haven't heard a whole lot of buzz on Matt Chapman. Again, another non-buzzy guy.
Yeah, and is it because he's also an unusual player? In his case, I guess it's because he's defense first. So with a defense first guy heading into his age 31 season, again, if you're paying him for what his overall WAR has been, he's almost a 4 WAR guy every year. That's a perennial all-star. That's a guy who gets paid quite a ton of money. That's a guy who's a lot better in real life than in fantasy too. But if he's glove first, needs his athleticism, how much you're going to rely on that heading into his 30s. And of course, his bat has always been weird too. He's always been pretty all in on power. So he's somebody that I could see teams not trusting nearly as much, even though he pretty much always ends up. I mean, every single year he's been a technically above average hitter by WRC plus. He was only at 101 a few years ago, but pretty much every year he's between 100 and 120 while playing good defense. The end result ends up remarkably stable for Chapman, but I don't think it's such a surprise that teams aren't totally bought in on him as a safe guy either. I mean, this is what happens when your free agency system is set up so that people hit it when they're 29, 30, 31. Everybody's entering that stage of their career where they're a little bit less trustworthy, but hey, they've been worth paying a ton of money to the last few years. So naturally they want a ton of money. And I think that's what happens with baseball system the way it is. I think it shouldn't surprise us that we keep getting these interesting players who are still sitting on the market into February.
You know, ever since he had his hip labrum injury in 2020, he hasn't been the same hitter. I think there's a pretty straight line. 2020, he had the 811 OPS, he played 37 games. Granted, that was the COVID year. Could have only played 60, but only played 37, had hip labrum surgery, was able to play last 3 years, a lot of games, but he's never topped 750 in OPS since. And this, despite being in Toronto instead of Oakland. I don't know, man. I can see why people are hesitant to kind of spend on him in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, if he's 118 WRC plus 2 years ago down to 110 last year, I mean, sounds like he might hit 102 this year and then 94 next year. And suddenly you might be paying a lot of money to a guy who just isn't actually pulling his weight at the plate.
Yeah. We got other free agents here. Tell me which of these interest you the most. JD Martinez, Jorge Soler, Ahmad Rosario, Tim Anderson. I just noticed Whit Merrifield hanging around out there too. Maybe more relevant fantasy wise than real life. He's the anti-Chapman there because of his speed. But of those five, who's the one that you're kind of waiting for to see, where he signs? Who are you most interested in?
Probably most interested would be either Soler or Martinez. They're the two biggest bats if they land in a good park with a good lineup, the type of situation where a big bat can do even more damage. I'd be particularly excited about them. But I think the most interesting guy to follow in that group is Tim Anderson because of his collapse last year. I think if Tim Anderson lands with a team that has a reputation for being smart, we will assume that the signing was probably a good idea and that they see some bounce back potential. Of course, with his injuries, there's every chance that there isn't bounce back potential there. And so that means if he signs with, the classic organization that signs whoever's left at the end of the year, and we all wonder why they did that. If he signs one of those deals, I do not want any part in Tim Anderson. I don't know who that smart team would be. And what if he ends up with like the Rays on a 1-year bounce back, prove it kind of deal? Then all of a sudden, I think your eyes are open to being like, hey, if the Rays see something here, I should probably be in. But if
both
the
Florida
Angels,
both Florida teams have openings at shortstop.
Yeah.
Both of those teams, I could see them like, hey, let's just jump on that. Obviously, with the Rays, I mean, their hand was forced with the Wander Franco situation there. With the Marlins, I mean, they're just forced by their own inaction. I mean, maybe the Rays just go with Caminero at shortstop. I mean, it could happen. Some sort of combination of Caminero and Walls, and they don't think Caminero. They don't like Walls isn't probably going to be ready because of the hip. Probably not expected to be ready for opening day. But Caminero, will they give it to him right away? Or are they going to make him go back down to AAA? I mean, he's still only 20. It doesn't turn 21 until July. So I know they've been pretty, reticent to really hand over the keys to their prospects right away.
Yeah, I was just checking how we have the depth charts over at RotoWire, and we've got the shortstop right now as Jose Caballero, who they got in that trade with Seattle. I doubt he's locked in as an everyday starter there. So that competition's not very hard right now for Caminero to grab the spot, but I think you're absolutely right that would be not particularly Rays-like for them to say, hey, young guy, it's all yours. We're giving it to you from opening day.
That trade was slipped under my radar there. The Caballero for Luke Raley. Raley was quietly very good for the Rays last year, but he's also kind of redundant for them. So I get it. But still, did not see, kind of didn't even notice that too closely early on.
It's not like the Mariners would be the kind of team who would make so many trades that you would miss one, are they?
Good point. Good point indeed. So there you go. We're going to talk about our differences in the RotoWire Roundtable and talk about some of the players we're not quite certain about. But before we do that, a quick note from our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax, they are the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Are you coming from another service? Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. I can attest to that. I'm in a Stratomatic league, 30 teams in this league, and we're porting over to Fantrax this year to do their draft and to run our league there. So we're looking, obviously you run our own games, but you keep the standings, keep the rosters on Fantrax, and looking forward to doing that this year. They offer the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. They can customize, you name it, they got it covered, including strat leagues if you're into that sort of thing. And it's all free. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Just simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/RotoWire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. Jeff Erickson here with Eric Halterman. We're also on the Blue Wire Network. Here are their ads. If you are listening live or streaming live with us, thanks for your indulgence there. If you're listening on the podcast and you just heard the ads for Blue Wire, thank you also. And thanks, Blue Wire, for hosting. Here with Eric Halterman, I'm Jeff Erickson. The latest RotoWire Roundtable Rankings are up on the site right now at rotowire.com. You can check them out. It's a free trial, rotowire.com/pod. No credit cards required. Just take a peek behind the paywall for a couple of days. We know you're going to want to subscribe, but this gives you a taste first there. We're insidious that way. We give you a taste and make you want to subscribe. Eric, let's talk about some of the players that we may have some differences on or ones we're not sure about. And I brought up CJ Abrams as our launch point here as a guy that I'm not quite sure about. It turns out I thought I was low man, and it turns out I'm second. You're the low man at 31, which is actually more in line with where I've seen him go in drafts lately. But I'm at 52. Clay's at 80. Todd's at 64. His profile is weird. I just don't know what to make out of CJ Abrams. So as the high man on the board, you tell me more about him, why you're on him.
So there's two different directions I think we could go to with this. The first is, well, he's going to run a ton, regardless of anything, any development with the bat. We can talk about that in a second. He's going to run a ton, and we still need guys who run a ton. I think that I've observed so far in the drafts that I've been in, these guys who 5 years ago, everybody in the fantasy community was loving, the players who are clearly you're drafting them for their speed. They may or may not do some other things, but they're the 40, 50, 60 steals and who knows what else you're going to get kind of guys. You still need those players, even in a world where everybody's stealing more bases. You need these guys maybe even more because you need to get more stolen bases. Or if you don't need them more, you at least need them just as much as you did. Maybe the guys who used to steal 30 are now stealing 40, but you still need those same players in the way you did before. So right. I think the CJ Abrams equivalent from 5 years ago, I think this is where he'd be going in drafts, even if the projection systems don't necessarily have him going that high. I was looking at where ATC had him. He was, I think, just inside the top 80, maybe. So that makes your rankings make sense from that direction. But we've always pushed up the speed guys ahead of where the projections go. That's how fantasy baseball has always worked. You could say that I don't do that, and I just am not going to get as much speed as other guys. I'm going to draft for straight value, then don't go for CJ Abrams. But that's the first angle, is that this is just, I think, how fantasy baseball has always worked and should work. But the second angle is he might actually turn into an all-around player who does more than just run, and he might do that pretty soon. I mean, he was a huge prospect both in fantasy and in real life. I was looking at his Fangraphs prospect profile. They give him future 50 game power. So he had 18 homers last year, despite not a very high hard hit rate. So if you're looking at that and saying, well, he might be only 12 homers next year, this is a young player who was projected to eventually get to average power. So I don't think it's at all crazy for him to take a step forward from, he was a 90 WRC plus last year. If he gets up to around 100 this year, or even a little bit above, adds a little bit more pop, I think that's not at all hard to imagine. And again, even if he doesn't, then we go back to the first point is you always had to draft these guys super high. I think that's still the case.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time reconciling here because, like, straight up on my projection using our custom projections tool, RotoWire, he ranks as 96 for me. I've obviously got him higher than that, in part because of the speed, in part, I don't know. I have a fear that, okay, he did this at age 22. He's a pedigreed prospect, so much speed there. I don't think he's Billy Hamilton. Like you said, he did hit 18 homers. Yet I've actually got him regressing a little bit in my power this year. So, our Outlook talks about his StatCast page and how it's icy blue. And that's like scary. I mean, this is one of those guys I don't have yet. I didn't have last year. I am struggling with him. I have a hard time getting past the notion that he's just not a good hitter in real life. He might be a better fantasy player than hitter. And I might have to power past that, especially if I need speed. The thing is, I don't want to pay that third round price for him. I want to get complete players. I'm not going to get, that means I'm not going to get him, but I could regret that. I regretted it last year. I mean, the fact is you won last year if you had CJ Abrams, if you took him. Now you're baking in that a little bit more. ADP in the last month is 39, a range of 21 to 64.
Yeah, I think that I want to make a point on that icy blue thing because I think that will affect how you view CJ Abrams' bat. I think if you look at the lollipops, as they call them, on the StatCast pages and just look for the blue and the red, you're going to see all the different numbers of blue, all the different types of blue. A lot of them are saying kind of the same thing. And the fact that you're getting his percentile ranking in things like barrel rate may actually throw you off. If you look at his actual barrel rate last year, 6.9%, so effectively 7%. League average barrel rate last year, 8.1%, so effectively 8%. So he's 1 percentage point below league average in barrel rate, or 1.2 percentage points. So if you look at it from that perspective, similar thing you could do with hard hit rate. He was at 35.7. League average was 39.2. So we're talking 3.5 points below league average. I'm not saying he's a good hitter who makes good quality of contact, but that's really not that far from league average when you combine that with the fact that he had a 19% strikeout rate, which is better than league average by a few points. I think that the lollipop-based approach, I think, is going to actually overstate how bad Abrams' bat is. I think Abrams' bat really last year was only slightly worse than average, and I don't think it's that much of a stretch for him to get to a league average hitter given his talent and given his age.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I guess also it depends on what's your plan. Like, how are you going to address stolen bases? I think if you start off with Acuna, you start off with, even Witt or Carroll, you can easily pass by him, and say, okay, well, I'm fine. You start off Freddie Freeman, now all of a sudden that's more in the equation, not to diminish what Freeman did on the base pass last year, or Mookie for that matter, but they're not huge stolen bases. You're not going to get 40 stolen bases from those guys. So you need to address it. And we know we need more stolen bases. Maybe, you start off with Trey Turner. Okay, well, then maybe you don't need Abrams. Again, same position too. Another reason why you wouldn't go that route. But there's, I think a lot of it's in conjunction. And certainly if you start off with Spencer Strider, CJ Abrams has to be in your calculus. You have to think about, okay, well, he's got to be someone I consider.
Yeah, although, of course, if you're taking no pitcher or no hitter in the first round when 13 or 14 other people are taking a hitter, and then you're getting a hitter who's going to be worse than every other hitter in his round in the power numbers in the RBI, then that might be a little tough, but he certainly will make up for the fact that you've got no steals.
Yeah. I don't want Estuary Ruiz. I'm trying to avoid the stolen base only guys. I want him to be able to do something. At least Abrams does something.
Yeah. Yeah, with Ruiz, I think if he wasn't on Oakland, I might be hard avoiding him because there's too much Malik Smith potential there, right? With a guy who steals a ton, so you assume he's going to steal a ton next year, but he also can't really hit, so he might not keep playing and might not keep getting the chances to run. I think in Oakland, Estuary Ruiz is going to be fine because who else is going to play? And so I think I'm okay with him, but I see what you mean. It's not as if he's got a lot else going on and a lot of reason for confidence in him as an overall baseball player. That's for sure.
The trade-off, of course, though, if he's in Oakland, then his counting stats are going to stink because, the lineup around him's bad. I mean, I like Geloff. I like Langoliers. You could squint and make a case for Rooker or, well, God, I'm already stopping here. But
if you're squinting by the third hitter you've named, then I think that's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just not going to get better for a while there, too. That's the sad part about that. All right, let's move on to our next hitter of disagreement, or at least variance, Evan Carter. And I like Evan Carter. I know I may just be. I'm looking to see why we're all. You're lower on. You're definitely a low man here at 146. I'm middle at 97. Zola's at 52. I get the idea that you don't want to jump on a guy that has just had like a month of stats. I get it there. At the same time, I just think between the prospect pedigree, the batting eye, his some speed there, there's a lot for me to like, and a great lineup around him.
Yeah, I'm open to the fact that I might just be whiffing on a guy who could just go off this year. But it's between the fact that his sample size was so short, just 23 regular season games, and then a 32% strikeout rate in those games. I would not normally, under any other circumstances, even consider a guy who had those numbers in the range that Evan Carter's going. So I think the fact that he's going there, I guess everybody else is aware that this is true of Evan Carter too, right? It's not like every Evan Carter drafter takes him and then learns, wait a second, he's only played 23 games. So that it's baked in. I get that. I'm just pretty nervous. And if we're talking as high as he's going, 120, that's in a range where you do pretty much need your players to be good. You don't want to be having too many misses at that point. Maybe, though, I should just have a lot more confidence in Carter. Partially, that high strikeout rate seems to be an approach and not an inability to make contact. When you combine that high strikeout rate with a very high walk rate, he has a 16% walk rate in his brief MLB debut, and consistently very high walk rates without actually very high strikeout rates in the minors. So maybe this is the sort of strikeout rate where I shouldn't be worried. It's just this is the sign of a guy running deep counts. And hey, if you run deep counts, you're going to strike out some. You're also going to get on base a ton. Maybe the fact that it's such a small sample, I'm just missing out on something there. And given all the good reports about him and all the other good things in his profile, maybe I should be in. Although also, as is pointed out by our commented there, the stats against lefties, very shaky. So if there's a world in which he ends up more like, say, a James Outman or a Jack Sawinski from last year, some breakout guys who you got way later in the draft, they had strikeout problems, but real power and some speed and issues against lefties. If he only has a season that's as good as theirs, I don't think that would surprise me at all.
Potential platoon problems too. He may just not face them. And that's the thing you have to worry about there. He only at the big league level, only 11 plate appearances. Thanks, PJ, for your comments in the forum about that. Man, though, I mean, it's just so, like, every time I watch an at bat of his, the broadcasters are like, yeah, he'll work that count to the 3-ball count almost every time. So of course it makes sense that his walk and K percentages are through the roof. It does make sense a little bit there. I mean, and that could be a source of frustration. It's good in real life that he's taking walks, not always good in fantasy. You want him sometimes to put that bat on the ball, but the speed, the power, I like, there's a lot of things to like about him.
Oh, we lost Jeff for a minute, so I'll riff on Evan Carter until he gets back. Oh, we've got him back. That was exciting.
The wrong screen. I was toggling back, and I wanted to go backspace on the my Carter page, but I was in the StreamYard page. Fun tech talk.
I thought I had just said something so bad that you just decided to end the pod mid-show.
No. But I might cut down on my playing time projection for Evan Carter because I think the platoon potential is high. I think that's something I don't think I took into enough account there. So that is something where I think I will probably I'm going to probably cut down his plate appearances just a little bit there.
Yeah, and if Wyatt Langford is up right away, and he may well be, he's incredibly exciting young outfielder there, is going in a similar range of the draft too. He's a righty. Adolis Garcia, a righty. Leody Taveras, a switch hitter. So that could be the default outfield against lefties. They don't need Evan Carter. I don't know if they're going to say, hey, we want Evan Carter to play every day in 3 years, so he has to play every day now to learn to hit lefties. Usually fans want teams to do that, right? And teams aren't always all that willing to do it. So I think it's going to depend partially on, are we seeing noise that Langford's definitely coming up? And then I think we're going to probably get some hints, right? This seems like the kind of thing that the Rangers will touch on in the early spring training press conferences. Hey, is Evan Carter an everyday player, or is he just a platoon guy? So I think that's hopefully some news we can expect to hear in a week or two.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am going to cut down a little bit on his playing time, which means I probably will move him down like a round or so. That's probably the way I lean on that one there. All right, next player on our list, Nolan Jones, Colorado Rockies, had a breakout year. Very tough guy to value because, first of all, the Rockies are terrible. They're just a horrible team. They're dumb. They always, I always make the joke. They're the team that eats paste in the corner over there. I mean, they're just everything they do is wrong. But Nolan Jones did a lot of things right. You've got him at 48. I've got him at 91. I don't hate Nolan Jones. I hate the Rockies. I don't hate their ballpark, but I just, I have a. But then again, he went 2020 last year and hit 297. So I don't know. I mean, I could be missing the boat on this one here. Maybe it's just I'm trying so hard to be a sharp that I'm actually being the square here. I don't know. What say you on Nolan Jones?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think of the four of us on the round table, I'm the only one who has Jones near his ADP. I think the rest of you are all pretty similar, a few rounds behind me. And so that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I think the rest of the world is right on this one. I mean, Nolan Jones is a quintessential fantasy hitter. It does not get more fantasy baseball than Nolan Jones. He plays in Coors Field. He's got power and he's got speed, and hey, he's got some contact questions too. That seems to come with every single player who's particularly good in fantasy. But he is well more than good enough to overcome those contact concerns for me. The list of players who had a barrel rate over 15% while stealing at least 20 bases last year, it's Shohei Ohtani, Ronald Acuna, Luis Robert, and Nolan Jones. So pretty excellent company there.
Yeah.
Again, that's a 15% barrel rate. This is a very loud contact, not just a guy who has good power. Very loud contact. Seems like he has some speed. I don't think that speed was in his scouting reports, but if he's stolen 20, he's got to at least have the ability to steal 10 again next year. And hey, even that strikeout rate, which is a problem, it trended in the right direction after the break. He was about 33% in the first half, 28% in the second half. So if he stays in that 28% range, I think I'm going to be very happy with how he's ranked. I don't think he's going to repeat that 290 batting average again. I think that's going to come down even with Coors Field, I think, given how often he strikes out. But if that comes down 250, 260, there's enough power and speed there that I think that where he's going, according to the rest of the market, I think I'm comfortable keeping him ranked there. I've
got him at 273 this year. As pointed out in the comments, the BABIP is huge, 401 BABIP. I think that certainly doesn't hold. Although I will say the high barrel rate, the high exit velocity, the hard hit rate, that portends a high BABIP usually.
As does playing in Coors Field, right? The outfield is so big. Some people get it wrong and think that Coors Field is extremely, extremely a home run park. It's definitely a home run park, but what it's more of is a batting average park because they make the outfield so big to stop it from being the most ridiculous home run park ever. And that means there's so many spaces for gappers to fall. So you should expect a high BABIP. You should definitely not expect a 401 from Nolan Jones. But all of the projections over at Fangraphs, the lowest one I'm seeing is 345 from the Bat X. That is crazy that the projected batting average on balls in play would be around 350. So when you regress that for Nolan Jones, just make sure you're not regressing it too much.
Yeah, that's right. Now I got to look and see what my projected BABIP is 368. So oops.
There you go.
Yeah. And that gives him a 273 batting average, by the way. So for whatever that's worth. Yeah. I mean, I'm not like vehemently anti Nolan Jones. I almost feel like I'm just trying to avoid being like the dumb guy, but maybe by doing so, I am the dumb guy. I don't know. Let's move over to pitchers. Cristian Javier, when we last saw him, he got bombed in his last game in the playoffs against the Rangers. He had a great playoffs until then, and then got actually absolutely gobsmacked by the Rangers. You are all the way out on Cristian Javier at 274.
Yeah, and the funny thing is I looked at where ATC had him, and I'm actually high on Cristian Javier compared to ATC, who I think had him outside the top 300 by the numbers when I put him in. Cristian Javier, even when things were working out for him, he was weird, right? He's an extreme outlier in how low his ground ball rate is. It's never been higher than 29%. League average is just a little bit over 40%, and nearly every pitcher's at least in the mid-30s. So he always seemed a little bit questionable. Was he going to be able to keep up his high wire act, basically? And now last year, suddenly he lost his strikeout rate, which used to be elite. Suddenly it collapsed all the way down to average, and his inability to keep the ball on the ground remained. That didn't change at all. So even if he gets some of the strikeouts back, he's still a pitcher that I'd be worried about. And there's a very real chance that he doesn't, right?
Mm-hmm. I think I'm in error in this one here. I think I'm too high in my rankings. Even my projections agree with you. I've got my projections have him in the 200s. So yeah, thing is, he once had a 33% whiff rate. I mean, that, a strikeout rate. I mean, that's not a whiff rate. That would be a record. But 33
2 years ago too.
Yeah. He struggled with his release point. We know that. But at the same time, I mean, he seems like there are things that could be fixed. The thing that is tricky is, the walks are always going to be high with him. Maybe he just got found out. This was the regression and this is his true level. I don't know. I feel like there's some in between there. But even some in between, I'm probably too high. Maybe I'm just in love with the idea of Cristian Javier and the idea that the Astros are smart and will fix him.
Yeah, and they might. But even in those first 3 years, some of the things that typically denote extreme luck were screaming in the case of Cristian Javier. If you look at his first 3 years combined, the BABIP he allowed was 223. And his left on base rate was 83.5%. That one normally is in the low 70s. He was straining 83.5% of runners. So obviously some of that was because he was pitching well, but you're not going to keep up those kind of numbers. And even last year, his BABIP was still actually 272. Now, granted, that comes with being an extreme fly ball pitcher. Ground ball pitchers run a higher BABIP because ground balls sneak through. You're not really going to sneak through a fly ball. So you should expect him to run a low BABIP, and the projections say he's going to be 270, 280 around there, rather than regressing all the way up to 300. Even so, when things were going well for Javier, it looked like he wasn't earning everything that he was getting. So even if you're expecting a bounce back, I would be expecting a bounce back to, say, his xFIP over those first 3 years was 404, while his ERA was 305. I think a bounce back version of Cristian Javier has him with an ERA right around 4.
Yeah. I just wrote down, move Javier down in my next roundtable ranking. So he will be lower.
I get a win.
Regress to what is the question, as always. But I'm moving him down. Tarik Skubal. Everybody loves Tarik Skubal. Very trendy guy right now in drafts. You look at average draft position for Skubal, 49. He is being taken awfully early. If that's in the main event, that means the 4th round. He's your SP2 in many cases, sometimes even SP1. Are you comfortable with Tarik Skubal being your ace?
I think so. I mean, here's the question. What is an injury-prone pitcher, and what's a pitcher who just has been injured recently? Because I think the reason Tarik Skubal is getting dinged is because he's viewed as probably injury-prone because, hey, he had a major surgery. Was it flexor tendon? Cut off the end of his 2022 season and half of his 2023 season. So that means you're looking at 2 straight years where he hasn't pitched. He had 21 starts and then 15 starts. So he has never had that full 30-start workload. He reached 29 a few years ago. But if we're calling him just a pitcher who has been injured recently and not one who is a major health risk whose arm's about to fall off, because look, he's had plenty durable seasons in the past. Again, those 29 starts in 2021. He was at looks like 24 in the minors in 2019. So if he's not way more injury prone than the other pitchers, maybe we'll call him a little bit more because he's had that recent injury. But if we're only saying he's a little bit more of an injury risk than the other guys, then we got to look at just how absurd his numbers are. 33% strikeout rate against a 4.5% walk rate last year, and he kept the ball on the ground over half the time. Those are potential best pitcher in baseball numbers if you were to keep that up over the full season. You look at some of like Garrett Cole's best seasons, Corbin Burns' best seasons, they end up looking like that. And I know this was only 80 innings for Tarik Skubal, so some of it's 15 starts in the first few of them. He wasn't allowed to go quite as long, so fine. He's not going to quite repeat those numbers, but man, he can drop pretty far from those numbers and even still be a pretty fine ace. And if he doesn't drop far from those numbers, there's a chance he's the best pitcher in baseball, right? Is that crazy to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of ifs.
Yeah, sure. We're weighing that in though, right? Against the risks.
Again, this is one where my rank is higher than my projection. So I'm kind of with you. I'm willing to kind of look back. Like the projection is, projections are notoriously calm and temperate and, modest. And that's certainly the case with Skubal. I mean, because it was an 80 game sample, the previous, stats are going to carry a little bit more weight, perhaps. Can he get, can he throw 160 innings? Will he get that, will the Tigers support him? I mean, I think the Tigers are secretly one of those, are a team that everybody points to as their, if things go right, this could be a sneaky good team sort of thing. We heard this last year though. We heard it the year before,
Yeah, at least a couple of years.
Yeah. And to be fair, they have some interesting young parts. I like a few of their young players. Torkelson, who doesn't like Torkelson? Who doesn't like Kerry Carpenter? I get it. Will he get more than like 10 or 11 wins though? I probably not. And the funny thing is when you do projections, you give a guy 2 extra wins and that just bumps up his rank by a ton. Starting pitcher wins are hard to get now, harder than ever to get. How many times have we seen like, a starting pitcher will get third time through the ordered, or just, they barely, the first sign of any trouble in that third trip through the order, out they go. And sometimes they're just even managed. And Skubal strikes me as someone that will get managed a little bit in terms of workload, that he won't be allowed to go deep into games. So that cuts you down a win or two.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was just looking at his game log from last year. His first 7 starts, he never went more than 5 1/3 innings, but that's as he was getting ramped back up. But after that, his 8 or 9 starts the rest of the way. It looks like only 2 of them he went fewer than 6. He consistently was going 6 or 7 down the stretch. So once he was built up, they were using him like a normal starter. And he reached 149 innings in 2021. So if we're in a world where you're not expecting 200, you're expecting 180 from your top guy, I think he can get 160, 165, and that's not too far behind what you're going to get from the other pitchers in that range.
Another starting pitcher that's a helium guy is the Mariners' George Kirby. The next walkie issues will be like his 3rd of the year. He's popular in a lot of circles, including mine. I've got him at 34. Todd Zola's got him at 28. You've got him at 46, which really, I mean, it's a difference, but come on, at the same time, there are drafts where he will slip to 46 and you would probably take him there, I'm guessing.
Yes. Although I think I had to move him up to get him to 46, but that was after seeing the projections just love this guy. ATC, I believe, has him as a top 20 player overall.
Wow.
And that was a shock to me. I would say where I had him originally, I think was a little bit past 46. Maybe it was in the low 50s or something. That already felt aggressive to me for a pitcher who is pretty average at strikeouts. It was at 24.5% as a rookie, 22.7 last year. It's not a hole there, but compared to everyone else's fantasy aces, he is a hole, right? If you're merely a league average or slightly above league average at strikeouts, whereas the average SP1 is pushing 30% with his strikeout rate. Mm-hmm. You are taking a real hit with George Kirby if you take him as your ace. you're hoping that he more than makes up for it in other areas. And I think the projections are telling us that he's going to. But I think where I initially had him anchored was just, this is where the best pitchers who don't get strikeouts should go. Normally they go, round 3, round 4. You're very happy with them as your second starter. There haven't been many cases in the past where there have been starters with strikeout rates this low who I'm thrilled to take as my SP1. But maybe that's just because his walk rate is so extreme at 2.5%. You basically never see guys this low. When he was at 4% as a rookie, that was already, one of the best you'll ever see. Right. 2.5%, maybe it's just such an outlier that it's breaking my brain and I don't know what to do with it. And maybe he should be going as a top 20 player overall. I don't know.
Yeah, I know walk percentage is typically better, but I just thought it was noteworthy pointing out 0.9 walks per 9. The next closest was Zach Eflin at 1.2. So that just shows that he's just in another tier all to himself. And a lot of people love Eflin, by the way, too, self-included. I think. It's interesting that, with this, you mentioned ATC, and one of the things, we have ATC projections on the site now, by the way, folks. So again, rotowire.com/pod, and you can look at every player page and see it. We have some places where you can see them as a whole. And I like having it as a comparison there, a contrast. You can see, it's funny. Ariel Cohen's got, ATC has got Kirby as a top 20 overall player. Yet my projection for Kirby is slightly more optimistic than Ariel's. I've got him at 331. Ariel's got him at 353. Same whip. One thing I will say, though, is Kirby is almost certain to give you a good whip. And that is a priority for me. The guys that I'm trying to avoid are the ones that, they may get you a ton of Ks, but they also have like a 125, 129 whip. Because whip is the category that often gets overlooked. And I feel like that's a hard one to catch up in too. So I want to get my rotation anchors to have good whips. So Kirby will be a priority for me because of that.
Yeah, and what makes that even more important is that he's going to be among the league's innings pitched leaders, I'm sure. He was at 190 last season. Given that this will be basically his third full season. I guess he had 25 starts as a rookie. He wasn't up right away, but effectively this is his third full season. I have no reason to believe they're not going to cut him loose. And when you're talking about those ratio stats, you have to care about the denominator, right? You can have as good a whip as you want, but it has to be over a very large denominator. And he's going to be the best combination of whip and innings pitched out there. So certainly if you're like me and you look at strikeouts first and probably too much, you're going to miss him for that reason. And I'm sure that explains part of the gap between my rankings and where he's going, according to projections, according to you and some of the other drafters out there.
It's almost as if PJ, our commenter in the forum, has seen our outline, because the next guy on our list is Dylan Cease. So Jeff is a huge Dylan Cease guy. Lots of laugh out loud. Excuse me. I always got LOL wrong. It's League of Legends. I always thought it was lots of laughs, but it's laugh out loud. Anyhow, good stuff there. Dylan Cease. I am not a big Dylan Cease guy. You're not a big Dylan Cease guy. I would be more on him in a different place. I wouldn't be a moron, I hope, but I would be more on him. Not in a White Sox uniform. And it's been like the least kept secret that he's probably going to get traded at some point in time.
Yeah, and right on the whip conversation, man, 142 last year. Dylan Cease, even when he had that very good season 2 years ago, it came with a double-digit walk rate, which I remember looking at the time, how often do you see a season nearly this good with a double-digit walk rate? And it was almost never. And then, of course, we got one last year with Blake Snell. So maybe times are changing. But Dylan Cease showed that he wasn't able to keep it up, that it wasn't a formula that was going to consistently work for him. Of course, the strikeouts did slip by a few percentage points. And I think if you're going to have his control problems, you need to be top of the scale in strikeouts. And he hasn't shown that he's necessarily going to be that guy every year. The projections really didn't like him, and I think it's because of that whip times innings pitched thing. Yeah. Again, he was outside the top 300 according to the ACC auction calculator when I put it in there, and he's going just outside the top 100 in drafts. I guess the drafters are seeing just a bounce back potential to 2 years ago, but I think the projections are telling us. Remember, too, we have to remember how projections are built. They're built by saying, well, other players who had career trajectories that looked like yours, this is what they did next season.
Yep.
Projections are telling us, well, other pitchers who strike out a lot of guys and occasionally have good ERAs, but consistently walk way too many batters, it doesn't really work out for them. So the projections are very down on Dylan Cease. They're down on Blake Snell, who we touched on earlier. Also down on Cody Bellinger, incidentally, too. I think I'm not a big fan because he walked quite a few batters last year, despite having a pretty promising rookie season overall. So I didn't end up in a particularly high place on him for similar logic. Is these guys who walk this many batters, it hasn't really worked out in the past, and it doesn't consistently work out for Cease, as we've seen.
So, Senga is interesting because I have like good vibes, good feels about Senga. Which is
I get that.
But 11% walk rate. I mean, that's the third worst among qualified starters. I mean, you're right. I guess for some reason I thought that he might have improved on the walks in the second half. I have a theory that foreign pitchers often have have a bias against them their first year. Umpires haven't seen their arsenal. I feel like this happened with Yu Darvish in the gyro ball. Pitches that other pitchers would get the call for a strike. Japanese pitchers, Korean pitchers, you name it, foreign pitchers that umpires haven't seen before don't get that benefit of the doubt. And I think that's one of the things bring in robot umpires now. And I think someone like Cody Bellinger might benefit from that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting case. I don't remember seeing research on umpire bias recently, but I would imagine it falls in the same directions that bias tends to. And looking at Cody Bellinger's strikeout or walk rate, it did drop in the second half. He was at 12% in the first half, about 9.5% after the All-Star break, which is still too high, but it is trending in the right direction. So if you want to stay on Senga despite some somewhat shaky projections, because like you said, the vibes are pretty good. It seems like he knows what he's doing up there. I get the case for not being out on him, but I do think that I am going to remain not particularly in on Dylan Cease.
Yeah, I'm in on Senga, not on Cease, and if that makes me a hypocrite, so be it. And the other thing about Cease too is you put him on the San Francisco Giants, and maybe I'll renew my opinion. The Giants low key have a pretty bad rotation, I feel like. But yeah, I just want players out of that toxic White Sox environment. I think that's really the key there. I just don't want any part of the White Sox. I mean, I had too many of them last year too. My AL Tout Wars team was just strewn with White Sox, and Tim Anderson, Lance Lynn. Wow, I really nailed this one. Eloy, another great Erickson's greatest. Shockingly enough, did not do well in AL Tout Wars last year. Not even close to doing well. So team context does matter.
Yeah, that White Sox just rapidly becoming one of the saddest organizations around. I remember when I moved to Chicago, I think it was end of 2019, and caught a White Sox game late in the season. They were already eliminated, but got those $5 whatever dollar dog night Wednesday tickets in September. Caught a game, was talking to some White Sox fans in the seats around me, and they were so optimistic and so deservedly so about that young core they had coming through. I was not a White Sox fan, but I was expecting to go to multiple games a year just because it was going to be fun on the south side of Chicago for years. And man, it has been the opposite of fun, and no reason to believe that's going to change anytime soon. 2
years ago, they were a huge favorite in the AL Central, and they just completely immolated there, and Giolito had a miserable 2 years there. You could blame, it's so funny. Like I was in favor of them firing Tony La Russa. I mocked them for signing him in the first place, hiring him in the first place, but getting rid of him didn't cure any of their ills. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I had no reason at all to believe that there's a sudden turnaround coming there, unfortunately.
Indeed. I think that's a happy note to conclude on here. Bashing the White Sox. Yay. Sorry, White Sox fans. I hope that we didn't offend too much there, but hope everybody enjoys this. Erik, thank you for coming on. Had a good time talking with you on that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Always a great chance to talk about the rankings with you.
Yep. And check them out for yourself. RotoWire.com/pod. Get that free trial, peek behind the paywall. Check out our roundtable rankings, among all of our other great content. Jason Collette, Todd Zola, Ryan Roof, all with features out lately. So check it all out. RotoWire.com/pod. Thanks for everybody for listening to the podcast today. Thanks to Fantrax for their sponsorship. And of course, we got Clay up tomorrow. So thanks. Make sure to tune in for that as we continue our regular podcast lineup. Thanks everybody for listening. Take care.